What's up, Webflow Wizards? For today's lesson, we're going to cover how to pull code from CodePen into your Webflow project. So CodePen is a collection of code you can use. I mainly use it to find inspiration for how things can be built. If there's something that would be not efficient to build with Webflow interactions or would require a lot of JavaScript or jQuery, sometimes CodePen is a great place to start. We'll start by looking for example of like wave lines that we could pull into our project. So there's a lot of different things we could use. And you can easily browse through these. I'm going to pull this example for this one and just click into it. So the first thing I usually like to check is how does this respond, because a lot of times people don't build these to be responsive. They're using fixed widths or heights or different things like that. It looks like when I scale the browser in, it's just being cropped. It's not actually sizing down, which could be okay. We could work with that, but we'll see how it works when we pull it into Webflow. The next thing I need to do is check in the settings, and if you were to copy all this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and paste it into Webflow, sometimes it works just fine, but a lot of times these CodePens are relying on CSS or JavaScript libraries. So if we look through all these and make sure that all these fields are empty, then that means we won't have to actually import anything for this to work. So it looks like this can be used just as is. I may also want to like pull in different hex codes and colors. So the next thing I usually check is to see, can I actually customize this? Can I actually change the way it looks to basically do what I want it to do? So if I look through all this code, again, the more you understand JavaScript and jQuery, the easier it'll be to know how to change some of this stuff. But we have a variable in here called stroke style, and it looks like it's pulling in a hex code. So what I could try doing is just removing that hex code and replacing it with my own and see if it updates. So usually it takes a second, and yeah, it looks like it works. And it looks like we have another one called line width. So maybe if we change that to 1, it helps that whoever created these named these variables really well. So it looks like it'll be pretty easy to customize. So what I need to actually pull into Webflow, I won't need the body because I already have sort of some body code styled in Webflow, and I already have an overflow hidden div, so I won't need any of the CSS. We don't have a canvas element in Webflow that we can create, so we're going to need to use custom code and just copy this and put it in an embed. So the next thing I really just want to do is see, will this even work inside of Webflow? So I'll drag an embed onto the page, because sometimes these CodePens either aren't compatible with Webflow or with other code you're using. So we need to see, will it even work? Now, if I were to put this inside like the head tag here, then it'll be all the way at the top of the page. But if I put it inside an embed, I can control exactly where I want it to fall on the page, in between what sections. And if you remember, we said we aren't going to use any of our CSS here because we have that, but we will use JavaScript. If you remember from our previous lessons, JavaScript usually goes in this closing body tag section on the page. So we can create open and closing script tags just like this, and then we'll paste all our script inside there. So let's just publish this and see if it works, and we'll just check it out on the site. Scroll down, and it's working, so it's actually there. Let's right click and inspect. The next thing I usually do is check the console for any errors, and it looks like we do have one new error, and so I can click on this to see exactly which line of code is it coming from. Looks like it's not coming from the code I added, it's coming from sort of my line animation nav up here, which now I'm noticing that isn't working, and it was working perfectly fine before. So this code that I added for this line is causing an error with this other code that I already had in Webflow. So that's something you need to check whenever you're adding in CodePens, is it causing new errors? So what I could do to try and fix that is if I search jQuery and open up my common JavaScript and jQuery code in Patreon, there's a JavaScript wait for page to load code that I could use. So I could just copy all that code. That means anything inside here, it's going to wait till the page is fully loaded before it runs. And what that may do is maybe this was causing issues with jQuery because jQuery wasn't loaded yet. So I can just paste all this code. I'm just going to copy all of it, and I'm going to put it inside of my custom code embed here. And let's see if that removes the errors. So we can go back over here and publish, and we can go back over to the live site, and I can inspect and check the console, and there's no errors, so that appears to be working, and now my line animation is working just fine, so that's perfect. I'll also want to change the background color here. So if I look in the custom code, it looks like there's one called fill style, and it's the only thing set to white. So I'm guessing if I change that white, it would change that background color for me. So what I could do is come over to the body tag here and copy that hex code that I have applied to the body. And then I can come over to this section and change that word white, replace it with the hex code that I want there, and we can publish and see if that fixes it. Something else I may try and do, let's see, yeah, so that worked just fine, is I may actually try and make this scale in and out with the browser width. That way I can adjust the size of it how I want. So I may call this embed line, and then maybe give this embed a width of 100%. And then we have this canvas element in here. We could style it because it has an ID of canvas. So what I could do is just create some open and closing style tags, and then I can target that ID of canvas, and then I can give it maybe like a width of 100%, and then see if that maybe helps it scale in and out with its parent. So let's just publish that and see if that works. So I can come back over to the live page and drag this in, and perfect. So now that's actually sizing it, scaling down. So that's a bit more responsive. So that'll work a bit better. And then once I have that, now that I have this class on this embed, I can put it wherever I want. So maybe this one would have a position of relative, which means I can absolutely position this to the top, give it a z-index of 1, give the container maybe a position of relative and a z-index of 2, so it's on top of the lines. You can treat these lines almost like a background element, even give it some negative margin to pull it sort of off the top of this whole section, and then maybe drop the opacity of it down so the lines aren't like tremendously obnoxious in that background. And then we can publish that, and again we have to check the live site because it's running JavaScript, and that's looking a lot better, and those lines are there, they're being animated, it's really subtle, and it's in the background behind this entire section, and it's all responding, so the lines are staying in pretty much the same place once it hits my max width, or before it hits my max width. So I can kind of control that from there. So that's looking good. That's a really basic example. Let's also talk about maybe a more complex example of something we might want to pull in. So for this next one, it's sort of this drawing app I could use for maybe like a kid's game or something. You can draw on this canvas however you want, select whatever colors you want, and you can even create new colors using these RGBA sliders, and add that color as a swatch here, and then just use that color there. So again, I'm going to go through sort of my same process. I'll go through the settings, and I'll check to see is there anything that this is relying on before I import it. It looks like it is relying on jQuery. So this isn't jQuery UI or any other type, it's just basic jQuery. So this comes in Webflow. I don't really have to import it, but if there was something that you did need to import, I'll quickly show how to do that inside of Webflow. Let me go ahead and delete this embed, don't need it anymore, and let me go over here. So if we wanted to import something, what we would do is create open script tag, then we do src equals quotes, and we'd wrap that URL in quotes and then end it off, and then we'd do the closing script tag just like this. So all that right there is how we'd import sort of this code, and then we'd create a new script tag underneath where we actually use the code. So we got to import this library first, and then we can use it below after we import it. I'll just delete that import for now because, like I said, it comes with it. So I want to just quickly check, will this even work in Webflow? And if not, I'll try a different CodePen. So Webflow already creates the body tag for us, so I don't need that. So I'll just copy all these divs and everything that's inside the body. And then what I can do is basically paste this inside an embed on the page. So let me actually create a new section that we can house some of this stuff, and I'll go ahead and delete the collection wrapper that we had. And then I'll drag in an embed, and this is where we'll paste all our HTML. So we save this, it's all in here. It's completely unstyled though. What I'm actually going to do is drag in another embed for my CSS. I'm going to store these in separate embeds so it's easier to stay organized and know what's controlling what. So I can copy all the CSS here and just paste that in. Actually, I need to create open and closing style tags first, and then I can paste this in between the style tags and hit save. So it did change like my body background color. I can delete all this because the body is already styled in Webflow. That's working fine, and I may even just give this a bit of a height just so it's easier for me to quickly access it while I'm working. And then let me see, let's also get all this jQuery and just copy it. And again, it's going to go in the closing body tag section. So open up script tags and closing script tag, and then we'll paste all our code in there, and then we'll save and publish, and let's just see if it works. That's the first test. So we refresh. All right, we can draw, and it appears to be working. If we actually just want to inspect and go to the console tab, we're not actually seeing any errors this time, so that's working just fine as we'd expect. So we could even use this as is if we want it, but there's a good chance we'll want to actually create these elements inside Webflow. That way we can change their style across breakpoints, and we'll just have a bit more control over what we want to do with them. So we'll keep all our our JavaScript as is. We don't really need to change much of that. The first step would be actually to recreate this exact HTML structure inside Webflow. So we know we can't create a canvas element inside Webflow, so we'll have to leave that canvas element in the embed, but everything else is just a div and a bunch of stuff inside that div. So we can go ahead and set up our div with that class of controls. So that'll be the first thing I'll do, is just drag this div onto the page, give it the class of controls. And what you'll notice is it's already kind of styled, so it has that overflow of hidden, it has a bit of margin, it looks like a max width of some sort. So if we open up our embed with our CSS, you'll notice all that's being styled from this controls class, and we probably don't want to have this. That way we can style it ourselves in Webflow. So I need to just remember all these properties: min height of 60 pixels, margin of auto, width 600, border radius 5, overflow hidden. So let's go ahead and do that. Min height 60 pixels, I think it was, width 600, overflow hidden, border radius 5 pixels. We can change that later. That might be, and then the margins of auto for sure. So that should hopefully get us there. Yeah, let's go ahead and just delete all this now, because we don't need to style it from here anymore. It's already styled in Webflow, and we have that controls div. The next thing we want to do is actually create these UL elements. Excuse me. Excuse me. So we want to create these UL elements sort of inside, and UL stands for unordered list. Now this could have easily been created just with divs and then divs inside those divs, but it looks like our jQuery is actually relying on these UL and LI elements inside here. So unless we want it to go inside this jQuery and rewrite every instance of it, it's best just to try and keep the same HTML structure inside of here. So if we want to drag in that unordered list, we just actually drag in this list, and it goes inside the controls div, inside our HTML structure. And you know, all the items inside, you'll notice, are being pre-styled with that border radius, that width and height. And if I switch this to an ordered list, we lose that style. That's because all our CSS is relying specifically on, it's basically grabbing all of that stuff. So it's saying grab every unordered list on the page, find the list items inside that unordered list, give it the width, the height, the border radius, all that good stuff there. So we're going to leave it here so that way it's styled and it's going to work with the jQuery. So we'll leave it set to unordered, and everything else is fine as is. The next thing we're going to notice is that if we go back to our HTML, inside this unordered list, each item has a class: red, blue, and yellow. and it's adding a combo class of selected. And what the jQuery is probably doing, if I had to guess, is whenever the user clicks on this blue one, it's removing that combo class of selected from the red, and it's adding it to the blue, just like that. So we need to make sure that this combo class we create is actually a global class that can be applied to any one of these, regardless of what their base class is. So let's just go ahead and set that up. This will be red, and you're noticing it's plugging in the styles for us. This will be blue from the CSS we imported, and this will actually be yellow. And then from there, we need to create sort of a global class. So I'll drag in kind of an empty div, give it the class of selected, and it looks like it adds that border for us. And now that's a global class that I can easily add on to these items. So then from there, let's just go ahead and create this styles how we want it to be created. So first thing we need to do is, it looks like the selected has sort of that width and height that I don't really need there. So I'll remove that. That way this maintains the same width and height, kind of like it was doing in the original code. And then let's see what else we have in here. So these are just background colors. So what we could do is remove all these and set our own background colors on those classes. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll select the red class and apply sort of my own background color here. And then I'm hesitant to rename these classes because the jQuery may be relying on them. It may be looking for that specific red, blue, and yellow, but I could search through that class later to see. So let's go ahead and see. That appears to be working. Let's just keep building out our HTML structure for now, and we can come back and add some of that CSS natively in Webflow later. So we have this section done. We can remove that. Our next thing is to have a button with the ID of reveal selected color, and it's going to have some text inside it that says new color. So what we're going to do is go ahead and drag in a button onto the inside the controls right there. Let me make sure that it's actually in the controls, and perfect. And then we'll give that button sort of the text of new color. And then we want to give it a ID of reveal color selected. And that obviously applied some CSS to that ID, so it must be inside our custom code. I'm going to go ahead and grab this controls div and set text align to center. That way it centers everything inside. And let me see if anything in that CSS for reveal selected color button. It has a border of none, border radius 5 pixels, margins, paddings, and width. So all that we can just style how we want ourselves. So there's really no need for us to have that. I can just give this class of maybe main button. That way I can reuse this class later. So a lot of this was styled using IDs, and I don't necessarily want that. So I'll just style it how I want inside of Webflow. Give it a bit of padding on all sides, more padding on the sides, less on the top. Okay, so we have that styled, and we can style it however we want. Now from there, what else do we have inside our structure? So we already have this button with the ID. We can delete that. Next thing is to have a div with an ID of color select. So let me go ahead and just drag that div in here. It's going to go right under the button, and we'll give it that ID of color select that the code is probably relying on. And it looks like it set it to display none. So let's go ahead and sort of do color select as a class, and set that to display block. It looks like it's still being overridden from this code. So let's go ahead and just remove that display none real quick. And save. Okay, that way we can actually see it. So that color select is this box here. Perfect. That's going to hold all these select options. And I'll just remember to set it to display none inside of Webflow right here when I'm done, because it's probably being animated with jQuery to where it's being shown. So inside that color select, we have a span with an ID of new color. It's not inside like a paragraph or anything. It's just a span. So I may actually just make that part an embed. So I'll drag that inside there. Perfect. And then we'll see what that does later. Then we have another div with a class of sliders. So I'll just go ahead and drag that div inside. And we're looking for that div with the class of, I think it said sliders. Just seeing what all we have in here. Yep, okay. So we'll add that class, perfect. And then what else do we have? All right, so we have a paragraph in there with a bunch of input labels. I may convert this to, so these are sort of the range sliders that we used from previous tutorials. For now, I'm just gonna copy all of these and put this in an embed, but we can like basically drag in our own paragraphs later. So that goes inside the sliders div right there. Perfect, that looks pretty good. And then what do we have after that? We have another div with no class or ID. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that this div isn't imported. If it is, I'll add it back in. And then a button with an ID of add new color. So I'll just drag this one in there and I'll give that the ID of add new color. Okay. So let's just see with what we have here, because that's the full structure, I think. Let's just see, will this even work? So if I delete, we want to keep the canvas in here, but if I delete all the other divs and all the other stuff, now these are all just native Webflow elements. I can style how I want. And then this is the only part I should need to keep. Let's publish that and see if it works. So then we can come back over to our live page and refresh. Okay, all right, so we can draw. Okay, perfect. Different colors. One thing that I will want to do, and then let's see if this works. And let's add a color. And yeah, that appears to be working. And let's just double check no errors. No errors here. One thing that I should have checked before I did all this was a way to increase the stroke thickness, because if I can't increase the stroke thickness, I probably won't even want to use this example. So that would have been a good thing to check first. Make sure that you can customize the CodePen exactly to your liking before spending a bunch of time converting the HTML inside. Stroke thickness, since it's something that the user clicks and adds, it's a good chance that the style of this is being generated with JavaScript, not in the CSS. So I can look through all this, and it looks like there is an option. There's a variable called context, and it's referring to this canvas element up here. And we're affecting stroke on here and stroke style. So one thing that I could do is try stroke width. I'm not quite sure what properties this canvas element accepts. But what I could do is just use the variable of context and then maybe target it with CSS, so we can do .css like we've done in previous tutorials. And what we could try is see if it accepts stroke width, and then set that to something like 5 pixels. And let's save and publish that. And let's see if it'll work. Come back over here, refresh. Okay, now I can't draw at all. And if I come over to the console, there's an error. And if I click to see which line, it's exactly the line that I just added. So it must not accept stroke width. One thing that I could try is see what other properties are being used here. There's one called stroke style, which I haven't heard of before, but I can tell that it's jQuery because there's this period in front of it. So it's .stroke style, so it's a jQuery property. So what I could do is actually just search jQuery stroke style and pull the first thing that comes up. And I'm seeing there's like the shape of the stroke, there's the style, which it looks like only accepts a color, like a hex code or something. So nothing that it'll accept width yet. But if I come down here, there's something called line width, set to 5. Doesn't look like it accepts a value like pixels or anything, but this might work. So what I can do is copy that and then replace this .css with this .line width and then change that number to whatever I want. And then I can save and publish and see, will that work? Refresh. Okay, I can draw. The line is a lot thicker now, so that's perfect. And then I can inspect, go to the console, and there's no errors. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, that's working just fine. I really had to take these all line by line. Like this span that has the ID of new color, that looks like that's sort of this box here. So what I could do is give this maybe like a width and height. Width would be 100% of its parent. Height would be 100% of the parent. And that way I can actually control the size of it from this parent using EMs or whatever I want to use here. Maybe make this like 7 and 7, not 710. And then we can set a radius 0.6 EMs. And then maybe give this somewhat of a border and turn down the opacity slightly so that way we can actually see it. Yeah, so that way I can basically style that sort of color picker. This stuff isn't aligning the way I want it. So it has a label and then it has an input. Really, I just need each one of the input fields, I think. So I could just copy these inputs, and what I could do is, well, I'll create a embed that only has the one input field for now. And then let me delete all that. Perfect, okay. And then from there, I'll drag in sort of a bit of paragraph text or a heading, however I want to style this. You can say red. Let me grab the entire parent and set the text color to dark. That way it's inheriting from the right spot. And then I can drag in a div and call this wrapper and drag in the embed and the text all in one wrapper right here. And then we can use the wrapper to do flexbox or something like this, and give that wrapper a width of 100% of its parent. Okay, so that way I can control exactly how much margin I want and the size of everything. I can even control the CSS of the range slider, just like we did from previous tutorials. And then I can duplicate this and make this one the green one. So it's just going to have an ID and a name of green. Right here, then make this one green. So basically I'm just taking this one step further and rebuilding each one of these out to be HTML elements inside of Webflow instead of inside of my custom code. So remove that and then give this one sort of the class of blue. All right, and I can delete that. And then I can set this one back to display none. So that way when I click this, it'll actually appear. And then we can just see like what other, I would just go through this line by line and see, you know, what other things do I actually need to leave styled in the CSS and what things can I style in Webflow. Like if I were to create sort of this width and height of 54 pixels on each one of these, border radius, all that, then I could technically just delete some of this stuff, I think, and leave the styles all done in Webflow. So I just had to go to each one of these elements and make sure that it's styled correctly. So let me publish, refresh, and make sure this all still works. So yeah, I can still control the colors here. There must be some CSS affecting some margin around this box, so I can remove that to make sure it spans the full like width and height of the embed. I can still create new color and switch between those colors. So like if I wanted to add white as a possible swatch, just drag all those up. Now we have an eraser of sorts. One thing that I could do, take this even a step further, is create like a slider for the width, and then let that be a dynamic variable maybe that I plug in to this one here so they can increase the size of the line that they're drawing or something. But yeah, that appears to be working. We have a base set up. We imported all of the HTML elements in Webflow. So now these are all elements that we can control across breakpoints. We cleared out a lot of the styles. There's still a lot more that we can clear out and actually just rebuild some of these styles on these elements in Webflow. And that appears to be working. So we have a basic setup of CodePen drawing on here. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it made sense of how you can start to pull some of these code from CodePen. Definitely go ahead and make sure the code works in Webflow first. Make sure you can modify exactly what you want to modify, and then from there start rebuilding some of the elements with actual Webflow classes and HTML elements. So I hope this video was helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.